Hello, welcome to the March 2011 video edition of the Iowa General Fund Monthly Revenue Memo. I am Jeff Robinson, Senior Fiscal Analyst for the Iowa Legislative Services Agency, the nonpartisan support agency of the Iowa Legislature. This video covers the month of March 2011 and the first 9 months of cash fiscal year 2011, July through March. Net revenue for the month of March was essentially unchanged compared to the previous March. On the positive side, the two main drivers of general fund revenue showed good growth for the month, with gross income tax and sales and use tax both up about 5.5%. The negative side includes gross corporate tax down $12.3 million and tax refunds up $21.4 million for the month. While the gross corporate tax revenue stream is notoriously uneven, March's decline marks the fourth in the last 5 months, indicating a negative corporate tax trend is in place. Tax refunds increased for the second month in a row, but this time of year, variations in the speed of refund processing can greatly influence how refunds look compared to the previous year. Year-to-date, net revenue growth is up 5.5% on a cash basis, 0.5 percentage points above the latest official revenue estimate, with transfer revenue excluded. Net revenue for the month totaled $377.5 million compared to $377.6 million for March 2010. But since March 2010 marked the start of a turnaround for general fund revenue, just equaling last year's level is not as bad as it may seem. On a cash fiscal year basis, net revenue over the first 9 months is well ahead of fiscal year 2010, but is below fiscal year 2009 and 2008. Please note, all quoted figures exclude transfer revenue. Looking back, if we examine the year-to-date revenue growth rates for each of the months so far this cash year, we see that the current story somewhat matters on how you look at it. The end of March 5.5% growth shows improvement from December's 4.7%, but has declined since January's 6.8%. The speed of individual income tax filing and processing has much to do with the reported growth rate this time of year. This next chart provides information covering net receipts by month over the most recent 13 months. Revenue increase months are colored blue, decrease months are red. The chart shows that March's $0.1 million decline is the first negative month since this past August. Personal income tax revenue is one significant driver of Iowa net revenue growth, and gross personal income tax revenue has now been positive for 10 straight months. Sales and use tax is Iowa's second most important general fund revenue source, and it has also been improving over recent months, with the past 8 showing monthly growth and only 2 of the past 13 reported as negative. The month of February is the start of individual income tax return processing season, and tax refunds issued in February and March 2011 were a combined 9.8% above February and March 2010. Although the tax filing deadline is still a month away, between 50 and 60% of tax refunds issued in a fiscal year are issued in February, March, and April. If individual income tax processing is ahead of last year, then the 9.8% refund growth rate will fade in April. This final table shows the cash year-to-date comparison for fiscal year 2011 through March. Gross revenue has increased 4.2%, while regular tax refunds decreased 3.6%, with school infrastructure refunds up 3%. The federal government publishes monthly employment numbers for every state, and they do so through 2 employment series. The first is often called the Household Survey, because the data collection involves interviewing members of selected households as to whether the working age members of that household are employed or seeking employment. It is that series that produces the unemployment rate. The second series is called by several names, including non-farm, employer, or establishment series. The data source for this series is initially questionnaires returned by selected employers reporting the number of employees they had on a specified day of the month. The results of this employer survey are later compared to the number of employees all employers report on their quarterly unemployment tax return. Each year, the Department of Labor uses the quarterly unemployment insurance reports to adjust the survey results to actual employment levels. This adjustment procedure is called benchmarking, and the results for state-level data are released in March of each year. I would now turn to the impact of the March 2011 benchmarking on what we thought was the employment levels during the recent months, as well as the impact of the revisions on what we thought we knew about the employment changes around the recent recession. To do this comparison, I will use the seasonally adjusted employer or non-farm data series. This chart shows the adjustments to employment levels after the March benchmarking of the employer series. In general, the most recent 15 months were revised down, and the biggest negative revisions being 8,800 jobs for August 2010. The benchmarking procedure this year tells us that the employment levels over those 15 months were not as good as previously reported. The average revision over 15 months is negative 4,100 jobs. The other important observation from this year's benchmarking is what happened in May 2008, shown here in green, December 2009 in red, and December 2010 in yellow. Those months are important because prior to the March benchmarking, they represented the pre-recession peak, the recession employment trough, and the job recovery from the trough, at least as far as the employer series is concerned. This table provides the pre-benchmarked peak, trough, and change. Those numbers show a jobs recession that lost 71,200 jobs, or 4.7% off of the peak, and recovery equal to more than 20% of the job loss. After benchmarking, the data still show the same peak and trough months. However, the depths of the recession and the recovery since that trough changed significantly. Adding the post-benchmarking data to the table, we see the job loss falls to 64,800, and the recovery 12 months later from that trough is only 8.8% of the job loss. From a payroll job perspective, the recession was not quite as deep as previously reported, but the recovery has been not near as robust. Finally, I add here the good news from recently reported employment data. January and February 2011 employment numbers have shown good improvement, and we have now recovered 21% of those lost jobs. But of course, the final benchmarking employment numbers for those months will not be known for a full year, and it will not be until that time real conclusions can be drawn from this data. In summary, March revenue was just below the March 2010 level, but individual income tax and sales and use tax both posted good gains, indicating that the revenue recovery is still intact. Year-to-date net revenue growth remains above the new REC estimate for the fiscal year. While recent revisions to historical payroll employment numbers indicate the recession was not as deep as originally thought, the recovery is also not as robust as previously indicated. However, preliminary job numbers for the most recent 2 months show promising growth. I appreciate your interest in Iowa General Fund revenue, and please check out the next monthly video memo in early May.